If you own a vehicle with less than 200,000 miles and have an auto warranty about to expire or no warranty coverage at all, listen up. CarShield has a low-cost month-to-month vehicle protection plan that covers more parts than ever. Visit carshield.com/audio to find out how you could pay almost nothing for covered auto repairs. Drivers who activate this vehicle protection today will also receive free roadside assistance, free towing, and car rental options at no additional cost. Get your free quote today at carshield.com/audio. That's carshield.com/audio.
We will hear argument this morning in Case 23-235, the Food and Drug
Last week, the Supreme Court heard arguments in a case called FDA versus Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine, but most people probably know it as just the mifepristone case.
Ms. Hawley?
Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the Court. FDA approved abortion by mail.
The lawyers who brought the mifepristone case are frustrated with how common abortion has remained, even after Roe v. Wade was overturned. They blame abortion pills like mifepristone for that, especially because the Food and Drug Administration has made it easier to get these pills over the last few years, online and through the mail. A Texas judge agreed with this reasoning, but the New Yorker's David Kirkpatrick says in Washington,
it doesn't look good for the plaintiffs. It sounds like the justices are very skeptical of the idea that a lone district court in Texas could upend 2 decades of FDA decision-making.
The main issue in the case seemed to be one of standing, whether the plaintiffs actually have the right to sue. Lawyers argue that their clients, ER doctors, could be forced to provide care to women experiencing complications from mifepristone, even though they're pro-life. Except, as Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson pointed out, that hypothetical seems a little far-fetched.
I mean, it makes perfect sense for the individual doctors to seek an exemption, but as I understand it, they already have that. And so what they're asking for here is that in order to prevent them from possibly ever having to do these kinds of procedures, everyone else should be prevented from getting access to this medication. So why isn't that plainly overbroad scope of the remedy the end of this case?
Even conservatives like Justice Amy Coney Barrett seemed skeptical.
The difficulty here is that, at least to me, these affidavits do read more like the conscience objection is strictly to actually participating in the abortion to end the life of the embryo or fetus. And I don't read either Scott or Francis to say that they ever participated in that. So, do you want to address that?
The plaintiffs in this case are a group called the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine, and they almost seem like a shell company for conservative legal aims. Reporting shows that they incorporated in Texas just weeks after the Supreme Court overturned Roe and almost immediately filed their challenge to mifepristone. Is there other muscle behind the challenge?
Well, the whole thing is really the brainchild of a conservative Christian legal behemoth, the Alliance Defending Freedom.
Even if you haven't heard of Alliance Defending Freedom, or ADF, you're familiar with their work. In recent years, the group has had win after win before the Supreme Court, most famously when they brought the case that would overturn Roe v. Wade.
They've been tremendously successful. You know, they're a 3-decade-old organization, and in the last dozen years or so, I believe they've won 15 rulings at the U.S. Supreme Court.
We likely won't have a ruling in the mifepristone case for another few months, but it seems as though the justices are going to allow access to the pill to continue. So why does this effort matter?
Well, we're talking about a group that is changing the face of the American law and is in many ways the kind of cutting edge right now of the Christian conservative movement. I mean, when that movement is winning victories, chances are it's through ADF or other allies funded by ADF.
So this is just the beginning.
It's safe to say that they are not done.
Today on the show, Alliance Defending Freedom is proving to be one of the most powerful forces shaping our legal landscape, even as their ideology becomes less and less popular. I'm Mary C. Curtis, filling in for Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Hey, listeners, whether you love true crime or comedies, celebrity interviews, news, or even motivational speakers, you call the shots on what's in your podcast queue, right? And guess what? Now you can call the shots on your auto insurance. Enter the Name Your Price tool from Progressive. The Name Your Price tool puts you in charge of your auto insurance by working just the way it sounds. You tell Progressive how much you want to pay for car insurance. Then they'll show you a variety of coverages that fit within your budget, giving you options. It's easy to start a quote. You'll be able to choose the best option for you. It's fast. Now that's something you'll want to press play on. It's easy to start a quote, and you'll be able to choose the best option for you. It is just one of many ways you can save with Progressive Insurance. Quote today at Progressive.com to try the Name Your Price tool for yourself and join the over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. This episode is brought to you by Rocket Money. Do you ever feel like money's just flying out of your account and you've got no idea where it's going? It is all those subscriptions. Think about it. Between streaming services, fitness apps, delivery services, it is endless. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions. It monitors your spending and helps you lower your bills. You can see all of your subscriptions in one place. If you see something you don't want, you can cancel with a tap. You never have to get on the phone with customer service. They'll even try to get you a refund for the last couple of months. All you have to do is take a picture of your bill, and Rocket Money will take care of the rest. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has helped save its members an average of $720 a year, with over $500 million in canceled subscriptions. So stop wasting money on things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/whatnext. That's rocketmoney.com/whatnext. rocketmoney.com/whatnext.
Can you give me a little background on the Alliance Defending Freedom? Like who founded the group and when and what's their mission?
Well, they were founded 3 decades ago at a moment of great frustration for the Christian conservative movement. This was around 1992, and people in that movement took stock of things and said, look, we elected Reagan twice, George H.W. Bush once, we're winning at the polls, and yet we keep losing at the courts. That same year in 92, the Supreme Court affirmed the right to abortion in the case of Casey versus Planned Parenthood, and also affirmed some pretty strict limits on religion and public life in the decision Lee versus Weisman. That one had to do with prayers at a public high school graduation. And so if you're opposed to abortion and also opposed to those kinds of restrictions on religious expression, you're thinking, what's going on here? And so Christian conservative leaders came together to form the Alliance Defending Freedom as what they saw as a kind of counterweight to the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, on the left, that could sort of push back in the courts against these kinds of liberal victories. Initially, it was just to raise money to fund other lawyers, and over time, it grew and expanded into a kind of law firm in its own right.
What did this group initially focus on?
Well, its first issues, and they're still important issues, were about abortion, opposing the right to abortion, and religion in public life. Things like restrictions on prayers in city council meetings or school board meetings or within schools, things of that nature. And over time, they added to that the question of sexuality and gay rights.
What cases, or any particular cases, brought ADF really into the limelight and put it on everyone's radar?
Well, early on, it was tough going because the composition of the court system was more liberal, less conservative than it is now. And so they would argue against abortion rights in various ways and try to chip chip away at those rights with cases about parental notification or waiting periods and so on. But it was tough sledding. It was an uphill climb. And likewise, they would try to fight for more religious expression in public context. But again, because of the existing precedents, that was a real uphill climb. They began to get a lot more attention, in around the 2014 period when they won the right of a town council in upstate New York, in Greece, New York, to pray at their meetings. And then a few years later, when even more importantly, they won the right of a Missouri church school to get public money for its playground, the famous playground case. And those two together began to chip away at the precedents which had restricted what the court referred to as the entanglement of religion and government. That's really come to a head more recently, those two precedents set by ADF in a case involving a coach who wanted to pray at the 50-yard line. Just in the last couple of years, the Supreme Court has really finished the job and put an end to those restrictions.
So since those initial cases, they've had quite a few more successes, right?
Yes, many. As I said, they won 15 cases at the U.S. Supreme Court. They've been rolling back laws that had required employers to include birth control and health insurance. They've rolled back all kinds of limits on government support for religious organizations. They're involved in protecting the anonymity of donors to conservative advocacy groups. They managed to block some pandemic public health rules, specifically regarding churches. And most recently, they've been very involved in cases involving what they call creative professionals, bakers, website designers, and others photographers who don't want to provide services to gay couples at gay weddings. So that's a range of the cases that they've been bringing with great success in the courts.
It's worth noting, though, ADF has also had some misfires, especially in the realm of LGBTQ rights.
Yeah, they have had a couple. People might remember there was a case involving a Detroit funeral home that they took this to the Supreme Court, and they tried to get the court to agree that transgender people were not really protected by anti-discrimination laws. That is, an employer could expect someone who was born as a man to continue behaving as a man and fire that person if that person wanted to identify as a woman. And in that case, the court went against them. Although I will say, in going against them, the court all but invited them to come back if they wanted to make a claim about the religious beliefs of the employer. If they wanted to say not just any employer can do this, but the freedom of religion of a Christian conservative employer might allow that employer to fire a transgender employee. That's a case, I think, that the court has sort of invited them to bring again in the future, and that they surely will be bringing.
They left an opening there.
Yeah.
Still, the former CEO of ADF, Alan Sears, told you that the group is, as he said, on a winning trajectory. Is that accurate?
I think you'd have to say so. They've had tremendous success at the U.S. Supreme Court. As I say, they're remaking the laws in a lot of ways at a time when the culture is decidedly going against them. I mean, if you roll back the clock 20 years, public opinion was 2-1 against same-sex marriage. Now we're in a world where that's been pretty much completely reversed. Some of the transgender issues that are now at the forefront of public debate, again, 20 years ago, were unthinkable. And so you have to say that Christian conservatives and their view of sexuality and sexual ethics is losing in the culture, but right now winning in the courts.
Let's take a look at ADF's tactics. Is there kind of a playbook that their lawyers follow?
Yeah, and it's not specific to them. I mean, they very self-consciously model themselves on the African-American civil rights movement, the NAACP. You find attractive, compelling plaintiffs, and you bring cases that will chip away at the precedents you want to overturn, and you do it in different circuits, so you can produce conflicting appeals court rulings, and that's the way to get something to the attention of the high court, the Supreme Court. So in the case of ADF, they'll bring an abortion case in a conservative circuit and an abortion case in a liberal circuit so that they can get conflicting rulings, and that compelled the Supreme Court to take it on.
David says another important element of ADS strategy is courting connections throughout the conservative legal and political world. The group runs a summer program called the Blackstone Legal Fellowship that teaches law students conservative Christian thought and then helps them get jobs on Capitol Hill. Missouri Senator Josh Hawley lectured for the Blackstone program. So did Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who spent 5 summers there back when she was a professor at Notre Dame. The program even has connections to Judge Matthew Kacsmaryk, the judge who made the initial ruling in the mifepristone case before the Supreme Court now.
He's someone who ADF could fairly well anticipate was going to agree with them. A year or so ago, he had an intern from an ADF program working in his chambers. This fall, I believe, he has an alumnus of that program, that same ADF program, clerking for him. And this is really just an example of the way that ADF, through its support for law students and legal education, has been able to expand their network in some pretty important places. For example, this last fall, I believe they also had clerks for Justice Alito and Justice Amy Coney Barrett in the Supreme Court.
So friends in high places.
Yeah, friends in high places.
You spoke to a law professor from Northwestern who said that 10 years ago, the group was considered so extreme that its claims bordered on the frivolous. Why should we be taking them more seriously now?
Well, as we've said, they're winning, right? When you talk about a group that's won 15 Supreme Court cases in the last dozen years, that's an influential group. Now, they would say that is due to their astute lawyering and hard work. It's probably also due to the fact that a succession of conservative presidents have remade the courts. With President Trump, I think, installing 3 Supreme Court justices, we now have a solid conservative supermajority on the Supreme Court, and that makes things much more favorable to a group like ADF.
After the break, what's ADF's next target?
This episode is brought to you by Discover. When it comes to your finances, Discover wants you to know they are the credit card that is always there for you. With 24/7 U.S.-based live customer service, everyone has the option to talk to a real person anytime, day or night. Yep, that means no more waiting for, quote, normal business hours just to get a hold of someone. We are talking real service from real people whenever you need it. Get the customer service you deserve with Discover. Limitations apply. See terms at discover.com/creditcard. This episode is brought to you by Discover. When it comes to your finances, Discover wants you to know they are the credit card that is always there for you. With 24/7 U.S.-based live customer service, everyone has the option to talk to a real person anytime, day or night. Yep, that means no more waiting for, quote, normal business hours just to get a hold of someone. We are talking real service from real people whenever you need it. Get the customer service you deserve with Discover. Limitations apply. See terms at discover.com/creditcard.
Now let's talk a little bit about looking ahead. We've mentioned some of their victories, some of the victories that ADF has won in recent years. Obviously, the big one, the overturning of Roe. So where are the group's sights set now?
Right. So once you overturn Roe, what's next? That was the kind of great white whale of the Christian conservative movement for decades. So when I ask them that, the things that come up are, first and foremost, gender identity. Your liberal listeners will understand that issue in terms like transgender rights, right? So the ADF and the people who support them think that transgender is not really a thing, that that's sort of a misnomer for a kind of gender confusion. And so they are pushing back on what they consider to be efforts by policymakers or government officials to kind of promulgate an ideology that enshrines or supports transgender rights, which again, in their point of view, is just a kind of confusion or psychological illness. So that's the leading edge. I mean, they see this sort of new orthodoxy, if you will, in matters of sexuality coming down from above, and they're trying to push back against it. beyond that, and as part of that, I think they would like to establish as a constitutional principle the notion of parental rights. In particular, if I'm a parent and I don't want the teachers at my child's school referring to that child by a pronoun that doesn't match the child's gender at birth, they think that I should have that right. If I don't want my child taught about gender or gender ideology in ways that contradict the values I'm teaching at home, they think that, again, I should have that right. And that's not something that the courts have found previously, and that's something that they're pushing for.
I've seen in the states a lot of laws and rules and regulations on trans athletes and also parental rights. So ADF has its hands in all of these state laws as well.
That's right. They've branched out from being strictly a court advocacy group to advising lawmakers in states around the country, and now also on Capitol Hill on drafting legislation. You mentioned the question of transgender athletes. That's been a real success story of the ADF from their point of view. They were the first to bring a case on behalf of female athletes complaining of unfair competition from transgender girls. And that's quite favorable terrain for them because they're marching under the mantle of feminism there. These are biological girls who are facing what is arguably unfair competition from transgender girls who have an unfair advantage by virtue of the fact that they grew up to some extent as boys. And as you suggested, after they brought those initial court cases on behalf of the female athletes, I think 23 states around the country have enacted laws to try to restrict or regulate transgender girls participating in female sporting events.
And they also were involved in the Florida Don't Say Gay bill, right?
Yeah, that's right. ADF has also been helping different states around the country write laws restricting or limiting what can be taught in schools. They've recently taken up the cause of some parents in Virginia who don't want their children to have to learn about different ideas about anti-racism, different ideas about a kind of dominant white culture that may be objectionable to the parents. So in a way, they are plunging out of their core Christian conservative issues and a little bit into race and education issues under the banner of parental rights.
But of all the causes ADF might turn their fire on next, the one opponents are most concerned about is same-sex marriage. With Roe gone, the surviving precedent most objectionable to a lot of conservative Christians is Obergefell, the Supreme Court decision back in 2015 that enshrined same-sex marriage in the Constitution. But 2 of the 5 justices who upheld Obergefell have since been replaced by conservatives. And there are lawyers who argue that the Obergefell majority undermined their own decision by calling opposition to same-sex marriage decent and honorable. So I asked David, has ADF taken any steps to try and overturn the decision?
Now, when I asked ADF about this, they said, look, we are not abandoning Obergefell, and I don't want it put on the record that we're abandoning Obergefell. At the same time, they acknowledge they think it was wrongly decided, and the cases they're bringing are precisely the ones you would bring if your long-term agenda was to overturn Obergefell. That is, the cases they're bringing, which they consider to be their creative professional cases, the ones about the baker who doesn't want to make the cake for the gay wedding or the website designer who doesn't want to design a website for a gay wedding, those are cases that call on the court to strengthen the part of the Obergefell ruling where they say opposing same-sex marriage is not bigoted, right? Those are cases that ask the court to find there's a legitimate freedom of conscience, there's a legitimate position that objects to same-sex marriage. And if your long-term plan is to say, wait a second, this so-called right to same-sex marriage is not at all deeply rooted in our traditions, then every one of those cases that fortifies a right to object is actually also undermining the right to same-sex marriage, if you follow me.
Yes, I do. In describing ADF, the dean of UC Berkeley's law school put it to you like this, that the group puts freedom to discriminate over freedom from discrimination. How do you think they would answer that?
Well, they, of course, think that's unfair. What he means is the case of the website designer. He would call it discrimination that she doesn't want to make a website for a same-sex couple for their same-sex wedding. ADF would say, not true. She has no problem with gay clients. She has plenty of gay clients. She doesn't object to a kind of person. She only objects to a particular interpretation of what marriage means. So they would say that's not at all discrimination. That's entirely about the right to freedom of expression of a creative professional. As you can see, there are two sides of this. If you're a gay person, you're much more likely to think that that particular quote-unquote freedom of expression is actually a freedom to discriminate.
So in ADF's view, it's traditionalist Christians that are the besieged minority that need to be protected.
That's correct. So they see themselves as representing an increasingly embattled minority within our culture who is holding on to fairly traditional ideas that 50 years ago were normative, but are no longer normative about, what is marriage and what is its purpose. And honestly, those are, I think, indisputably, increasingly a minority perspective. And it turns out the Supreme Court is also quite sympathetic to that view. And if you read some of the opinions, including some of the dissents by Justice Thomas, Justice Alito, they have really likened the prevailing views of sexuality to a kind of authoritarianism, that they believe that liberal officials and liberal courts are trying to impose almost by force on our culture. And that's the worldview of ADF right now, that they are the true libertarians, if you will, that they are like the ACLU of yesteryear, representing unpopular minority viewpoints against an oppressive and dominant culture. In this case, that oppressive and dominant culture is liberal.
So as you started saying in the beginning, though, you think probably from looking at this case with mifepristone, it will be allowed that this is definitely just the beginning.
Yeah, I would say it doesn't look like the Supreme Court is going to severely restrict the prescribing or dispensation of mifepristone. They're not about to weaken the FDA in this way. That would cause a lot of problems for other drug companies down the road. But the battle's not over. We're going to continue to see ADF coming back to the Supreme Court to try to litigate a whole host of issues around sexuality, gender, abortion, all of these things where ADF and a faction of the court see themselves as protecting this embattled minority, which disagrees with the prevailing trend in our culture right now.
Thank you, David, for coming on What Next?
It's been good talking to you.
David Kirkpatrick is a staff writer for The New Yorker. That's the show. If you're a fan of What Next, the best way to support our work is to join Slate Plus. Go to slate.com/whatnextplus to sign up. What Next is produced by Paige Osborne, Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Anna Phillips, and Madeline Ducharme. We're led by Alicia Montgomery, with a little help from Susan Matthews. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations here at Slate. And I'm Mary C. Curtis, columnist at Roll Call and host of its Equal Time podcast. Find me on Twitter. I'm at mcurtisnc3. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.
I have diabetes. I'm at risk for pneumococcal pneumonia.
I have asthma. I'm at risk too.
If you're 19 or older with chronic conditions like asthma, diabetes, COPD, or heart disease, or are 65 or older, you are at increased risk for pneumococcal pneumonia. Ask your doctor or pharmacist about Prevnar 20, pneumococcal 20-valent conjugate vaccine, a Pfizer vaccine that can help protect you against pneumococcal pneumonia in just one dose. Even if you've already been vaccinated with other pneumonia vaccines, Prevnar 20 may help provide added protection. Prevnar 20 is approved for adults to help prevent infections from from 20 strains of the bacteria that cause pneumococcal pneumonia. Continued approval may depend on a supportive study. Don't get Prevnar 20 if you've had a severe allergic reaction to the vaccine or its ingredients. Adults with weakened immune systems may have a lower response to the vaccine. Side effects include pain and swelling at the injection site, fatigue, headache, muscle, and joint pain. For full prescribing information, please call 1-855-213-2138 or visit Prevnar20.com.